Let's go out, we'll take no prisoners.
Welcome back. This is episode 2 of A Producer's Guide to Indie Filmmaking. My name's Federgreen, and thank you for joining us today. Today we have a dear friend of mine who was the show creator for one of Canada's best comedic series, in my opinion, Less Than Kind. We have show creator Marvin Kaye. Marvin, welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. I'm touched that I'm considered such a good friend and such a talented person by you. It's very
well. It's true.
It's very warm.
It's true. Less Than Kind remains one of my top favorite Canadian series of all time, and I wish it was still going on. But Marvin, why don't you tell us, the beginnings of you in the Canadian industry, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, all right. Let's go back into Marvin's history. I started off in music, actually. I went and studied at the McGill Conservatory. I was a voice major. I thought I'd be an opera singer, although I didn't really like opera. But I did two years of all my performance courses, and then they said, you have 2 years of history and theory left. And I went, bye. And then I went and studied theater after that in Vancouver at Studio 58. And I ended up doing a lot of musicals and summer stock after that. But while I was at Studio 58, I wrote a one-act play called They Have Mayonnaise in Montreal, which got some critical acclaim that year. They did a festival of one-acts. And it got chosen as in the papers in Vancouver as like one of the highlighted theater pieces of the season. And so being who I was in the industry, I ignored that for about 10 years and went off and thought I could become a star on film, TV, and stage. You want me to keep going?
Keep going.
So years later, as my career hit a stall, I decided maybe I should take out this play and see what I can do with it. Right. And so me and a dear friend of mine, Chris Federgreen, we looked it over and I thought, oh yeah, this could be a series. So we wrote some bits for it and we went to Buffalo Gal Pictures in Winnipeg, who said, you should go to the National NFC with this and see what they did. So we went in and we got in with that. And it ended up becoming Less Than Kind, and it was the first thing I ever pitched. And just like most writers out there, the first thing I pitched got greenlit,
which is like lightning in a bottle, really.
And well, yes, and not only that, it attracted like some big talent like Mark McKinney and all of these Kids in the Hall people, and some people do it. And then we were shooting, and I thought, wow, this is great. This is how must be how all writers and producers get started. You just write it, you pitch it, and it's greenlit.
And one note about the cast of Less Than Kind, and it was truly an amazing ensemble cast, including starring Maury Chaykin, God rest his soul,
yes,
who's one of my favorite Canadian actors ever, and quite the gentleman as well. So great ensemble cast, which helped in conjunction with the great writing, make it as successful as it was.
Yeah, and Maury was because it was based on my family and me growing up in Winnipeg, and my father was a gregarious person, very much like Maury. Like when I met Maury, I thought, oh, this is my dad. My dad's alive, and like he just had that same. My father had that same sort of energy. And Maury coming on board was really, that greenlit a lot of things. It was fun.
But also, I believe Mark McKinney was one of the writers as well with you.
He came on board in the second phase of development.
Yeah.
And that to me was, I was awed by it. Like I remember sitting down and having a meeting with this guy, and I'm going, this is somebody I've seen on SNL. This is Kids in the Hall. Like I was just sitting there and he was talking about my show, and I was a little starstruck, but he is so creative and so honest, and it was just so lovely and so inspiring to be.
He bought in so much that he fought for the show the whole way through his involvement, right?
Yeah, he fought for it, and I think having him there, because he has the strength and the reputation, him and Gary Campbell, who was also a member of Kids in the Hall on the writing side, that it gave us a lot of freedom that most shows didn't have, because we were an edgier show. Like, we dealt with the coming of age of a teen, and we weren't shy about some of the sex and the drugs and all the other stuff that we dealt with. And eventually, because Maury passed in the second season, we actually wrote the death into the show, which ironically, like, the reason I wrote the play in the first place was because my father had passed away. Right. And it was actually in the original conception of the show that we would go for 4 seasons, and like we would watch the father get ill and pass away, because that was the whole motivation behind writing the play to begin with.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, as the show progressed, I mean, it did 4 seasons, but the latter seasons got a little bit more edgier because HBO Canada really gave you the creative right to be able to make it.
Yeah, well, the first season we were on City TV, which then got sold, and it got sold after the first season, and we had already shot the second season when the sale had taken place. Right. And then the new people had come in while we were editing, and they were trying to edit the show to be more in line with their
and that was
thing.
CTV, correct?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's the first time I ever saw Mark like explode in an editing room, just because we kept getting like, oh, why don't you come in here and out there, and to cut this little bit out and put this little bit here. And we were like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? And so then we reached an agreement with them, but at the same time, somebody who was at City, who had originally greenlit us, had moved to HBO Canada, and they said, why don't we take you? And then we were able to do, for the second season, we put back everything we'd cut or started to cut. And then when we got renewed for the third season, they said, do whatever the fuck you want. And we were like, are you sure? And they were like, yeah. And so Mark and Gary and all of us in the writing room, Chris and myself, like we were able to put out anything we wanted and do that. And it was, and even Mark and Gary both say it was one of the most creative, loving experiences of their life, because that doesn't happen very, very often. And it was my first show, so I was in this bizarre state where I thought, well, this is the industry, right? But I didn't realize that I was on like a huge acid trip for that whole thing. That I was in dreamland that most writers don't ever get to.
Right.
Yeah.
So that, ended unfortunately after 4 seasons. And so talk about what happened with you, and, where, and then, as far as you finished this amazing run on this amazing show that was, nominated for awards and all these other things, and then it's gone. What next?
Well, first we started pitching shows then. The reality was we probably should have been pitching shows a year previous, but because I was ignorant and didn't know the business as well, and there was really nobody telling me what to do. And that's, if I was to go back, I wish I could whisper in my ear, like, you're hot now, go spread the fire. Right. Because I thought, okay, let me just finish this and then I'll move on to the next thing. And that's not how the biz works. You have to be, if you're on fire, you got to spread it and go. So after it closed, I got into development on a couple of shows. I wrote on a couple of other shows. But I'll be very honest, as a writer, because my experience was just let me write, I just got to write what I wanted because it was my show based on my life. And I was in this room that had freedom. I thought every show was like that. So I would jump on shows and they would tell me what their format was. And I would just go, okay, well, I'll just write what I want. Right. Because they want me to write. Right. But what you don't understand, what I wasn't taught was you're being hired to write for them.
Right.
You're being hired to write their voice.
Right.
And so I did a few shows. I did well on those shows. One of the scripts got nominated again after that for best comedy.
Right.
And then and also I was in front of the camera as well. Right. I was still doing stuff, and I got onto a few series for an episode or two here or there. I've done 3 episodes of Murdoch Mysteries.
Right. Right.
So that continued, but then things really started to die off for me.
Right.
I reached a point where I wasn't working.
What, you were becoming irrelevant?
I think I passed the irrelevant point.
Right.
To the point where I wasn't sure what I should be doing next.
Right.
And that's when I started to have to look back at what I was doing and what I think the industry expects of me.
Right.
And start realizing that, every writer is really a producer.
Right.
And every writer, whether you have an agent or not, you are your own agent.
Right.
And you have to get this stuff moving, and you have to get it going. And it took me probably 5 or 6 years after Less Than Kind ended to start to understand that. And honestly, if I was designing a course for writers right now, I would say it's great. If you're a talented writer and you have an ear for things, that's great. Understand what this business is, especially in this country.
Right.
How you have, learn how to fill out the application forms.
Right.
Learn what grants and stuff are available to you. Learn how to pitch, because most of the time you're going to be pitching to people who've never made a show before.
Right.
So you have to know it's about sales.
Right.
It's not about being creative per se. It's about how to sell yourself as creative.
Right.
Yeah.
But based on all this, I mean, from my point of view, I think Canadian television has a real problem. And you and I've had these conversations together over coffee and sandwich, sandwiches at Center Street Deli. That we only see procedurals. We see reality television, lifestyle factual television, but we really don't see, and we're not really looking at the American television model or the British television model and trying to create shows that are anthology related or whatever. Like, it's always the same old. Yeah, right?
Well, it seems that, especially in Canada, we're in this sort of middle zone where we're instead of trying to be creative, we're trying to appeal to markets outside of us.
Right.
And Quebec's a bit different.
Right.
Like they seem to want to do their own thing. So I'll just jump ahead, because recently my best luck has been in pitching to producers in Europe, where I sent them a script I wrote that was about an edgy concept, and they were like, "Oh, this is great." And I was like, "Oh," and then I said, "Well, what else do you need from me?" And they were like, "Well, we're on board. Just tell us what you need." And I was blown away.
Right.
But yeah, in Canada, the market seems to be about trying to be, which is sort of almost typically Canadian, the nice middle guy.
Right.
We're not trying to do anything too edgy. We're not trying to do anything that's bad, but we don't want to be too edgy. And recently, especially the meetings I've had, all the producers have been asking for blue sky procedurals. Right. Which is like procedurals that aren't don't push the edges. Everything ends after the first episode, and then you just take the characters and you start something else.
And it's a lawyer show or a cop show or a hospital show.
Yes.
Doctor show.
Doctor shows.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's been a lot of what's being thrown at me. And what's funny is when I talk to other producers, who have larger production companies, they even look tired telling me that this is what the market is demanding right now. But meanwhile, I know the shows I watch, the shows that are winning awards, the shows that I see being talked about are none of those fucking shows. They're all the edgier shows, and they're the shows that I'm enjoying are the ones that are made in Europe, that are that push the edges a bit, that try and do something a little different. So it seems we're caught in this like nothing land of trying to be nice and not trying to do anything too creative, because that's a little scary.
Well, the other thing too is like we export more comedians than any other country in the world, yet we don't do comedic shows like we used to. And we're seeing, we would never get a show like Ted Lasso or some of these kinds of, comedic yet dramatic series off the ground here, because the broadcasters, to be honest, and I'm going to say it out loud, are dead from the neck up when it comes to this kind of stuff. And they fall in line with what they know, which is procedural. And we should be doing comedic shows. We have a great talent pool of comedians in this country that deliver time and time again, and it's been proven historically. And yet seem to be now afraid of doing comedic series.
Well, and I think it's part of that sort of blue sky procedural. It's just this formulation of trying to get something that's easily digestible to the public instead of something that might make you squirm and laugh at the same time. Like that, to me, those are the shows I enjoy watching. Those are the shows that I enjoy doing. Now, I can write the other stuff, but in terms of the creative thing that makes your heart pump a bit, like that's all the stuff that's interesting for me. And I'll be honest, in terms of Canada, most of the broadcasters, all of the broadcasters, I don't see any of them really pushing that line at all. Sometimes a little on CBC Gem, but even that, it's
still holding back.
It's still held back, and it doesn't really pay attention to the craft of it as well. Right. And so there's this imbalance of like, well, if that guy's got a big TikTok or YouTube following, we'll make him the showrunner. Well, he's never really written a show before. Oh, well, we'll get another experienced writer in, but we won't call them a showrunner. We'll just have them help him in quotation marks, write the show. Right. And then it'll still be, but we'll still promote it as that person's show. Right. And that I've seen that happening a couple of times now, or a few times now, where people have done that, and it's like, it's shocking to me that that's being allowed to happen.
Well, the other thing too is we've heard this over and over again from the bureaucrats that run and fund television and film, is that we need to develop and create a star system. Well, how do you do that if all of the stars are leaving the country to go be in successful shows outside of the country?
Well, I would ask you, like, what defines a star then? Well, is it a star? Is it somebody who has like over 100,000 followers on TikTok? Right. Or is it someone who's toured multiple countries doing comedy shows, or being in plays, or writing plays that have been produced across the planet?
I mean, if you look at people like Don Martin, who were, in the early days of creating amazing television in this country, he went to the US. Yeah. And is a Tony Award winner now and things like that.
Look, if I could whisper into my ear 10 years ago when my show was winning awards and getting critical acclaim, there were people who were saying you should go to LA, you should do that. But I was like, I felt so overwhelmed with what was happening around me that I just thought, okay, let me just finish this and then I'll go. Right. But the truth was, and that I was too stupid or too arrogant to hear that this is how you plant the seeds. Really, if you want to be a success in Canada, you have to be a success somewhere else first. Right. And then the Canadian system will look at you and go, oh, you're a star there. Well, now you can be a star here. Well, and that seems to be, you have to seem to have that permission. You need that permission to really get access to the full respect and a cooperation.
And when it comes to like primetime television, a lot of the broadcasters here, and you know who you are
hold on, is this show, are you aiming a bullet at all the broadcasters?
I mean, that's what Unleashed is all about.
Oh, okay.
That's what we're here for. It's like telling the honest truth about what's going on. Okay. Is that they tell you, go find an American broadcaster and then come back to us. I mean, So if you're saying go find an American broadcaster who wants to take your show, you're basically suggesting that American television broadcasters know what's good and what's bad before you can even identify that, which I think that's a huge bullet in the head. Really.
Yeah. And it's, to me, it's all part of that same thing where everybody is trying to make it formulaic and mathematic and algorithmic in terms of, instead of reading something and going, wow, I felt something with this. Let's see if we can make it. I'm not saying everything should be like that, right, but I'm saying there should be some stuff like that, right? Because we have the other stuff. Right. The other stuff is I hesitate to use the word easier to make, right, but it's easier to find. But to actually go and find something that's darker, or I don't like to use darker, just it's edgier, right, that makes you squirm, laugh, or cry within the same 10 minutes. Right. That seems to be a too risky a venture right away, unless you get, like you were saying, a U.S. star, right, or a European star, or a European, right, director, or a U.S. director wants to come on board, and then, right, suddenly, oh well, now it's this is a 100% Canadian aside from this one person. And
look, there are obviously some series in Canada like Heartland, like Murdoch Mysteries, that are successful, but they're speaking to an audience that is, an older audience. And yet, we're not on Canadian broadcasters, we're not grabbing the audience of tomorrow. Right. I mean, I think that's a big problem, that we have nobody under the age of, really, let's say 40, maybe 50 and under, that are not gravitating to watching Canadian television.
See, I agree with that. But also I acknowledge the fact that, Murdoch, was it 17 seasons, 18,
something like that. Yeah.
I mean, you don't get to do that unless there's an audience base, like you were saying. So there is an appreciation for that. Yeah. I just don't see the appreciation. I just don't see the desire, right, to create the appreciation for, right, the other stuff that we're talking about. Right. It's like, okay, you've got Murdoch, and you've got Heartland or whatever, all of these things. Yeah. And they are rock solid. Right. Right. You don't go 17, 18 seasons, right, just making crap. Right. Right. You're rock solid. You're doing whatever you're doing. And whether I like it, you like it, doesn't matter. They have an audience. Right. But what I don't see is that the willingness and the courage to just say, let's make this other thing. Right. And it makes me, every writer I'm talking to right now, it breaks my heart that the CBC is the last place they want to pitch. Right. It should be the first place you want to pitch. Right. It should be like, everybody should want to get in there. And it is the thing. It's like, well, I guess we can pitch at CBC. Like it's so hard to hear that from people. And I'm like, and when I sit down and I have drinks with people and they're telling me this, I go, oh my God, this is so heartbreaking. Why isn't the public broadcaster that just gets money to make stuff, that doesn't have to rely completely on a market system, why aren't they doing more interesting stuff, and not just the stuff for CBC Gem and all of that, but like, why not? Right. It's
I dumbfounded by the development money that is being spent and the production money that's being spent on episodic television in this country that doesn't answer to the audience out there. And my kids and their friends, in their 20s and so on, are not watching Canadian television. They're watching Netflix, they're watching Paramount Plus, Apple, whatever, because they can't find anything on Canadian television that even remotely interests them.
Well, I mean, I've got a 16-year-old at home, so I don't think she's watched anything on Canadian television. Not a thing. But I mean, there's also, I think the industry is in this transformative phase. I mean, YouTube has more people watching it than any of the streamers, right. and any of the broadcasters. Right. So there's something happening here. And in my opinion, the only way to really get a hold of anything is to take those risks, is to actually, you've got to be that a broadcaster should be bold and interesting and do things that nobody else, that you can't see anyplace else. Because if you can see it someplace else, like YouTube, then you'll go to YouTube. I mean, I know I spend time on YouTube now, more time probably than I do watching a lot of series. And I'm like, oh, I'm putting myself out of business. Okay, great.
But we had on our episode 1, Jeremy Lalonde, who, couldn't make anything happen in film and television, and he's created his own YouTube channel, and it's become very successful. And we're seeing a lot of episodic shows being put on YouTube that people are watching. My daughter watches a show called The Rookie on YouTube.
Yep.
And she found this show. She watches it religiously. She's watched all the episodes over and over and over again. The people under 30 are generally gravitated to the internet and to YouTube. And, why doesn't a broadcaster wake up and go, maybe we should, instead of putting it on traditional broadcasting, why don't we put our show on YouTube?
Well, I mean, I don't know how the legalities of that work, but I'm sure that there is an aspect of it. Like, they must be looking at it. I mean, they can't not be looking at the success of YouTube.
Well, we know that Canadian television is years behind other countries as far as what's being made. Like, we're way behind as far as the kind of television that we're making.
Yes. It's funny. I've been watching more shows in Australia, Germany, all of these kinds of shows more than I've been watching.
Yeah, anything. I watch Korean series, I watch Japanese series, I watch Israeli series, I watch Hungarian series, and I watch it all on either Netflix or YouTube or whatever, because it's way more engaging for me to watch this stuff than what I can find in my own country.
Well, and again, that to me, that brings me back to the heartbreaking thing. It's like, I don't understand what the agenda is right now. Right. And I don't, and what baffles me is, it was about a month ago, I called up a bunch of different writers and stuff and just said, okay, let's have a drink. Let's have a coffee. Tell me what's going on in your life. And everybody was saying the same thing. And we're picking on CBC right now, but we'll just keep doing it, because why not? If we're bullies, we're just punching the same guy in the face 20 times. Right. But they were all just saying, what is the point of this? Right. Why bother? Right. And if I don't have that TikTok following, if I don't have that YouTube following, if I don't have that Instagram following, I'm not going to get a show. I had one guy who was like, should I get my real estate license? And I was like, I don't know, maybe you should. Yeah. Because at least, that's something. But to think that people, I mean, I'm in my 50s, to think that that's it. As I thought as an actor, okay, yeah, when I hit my 50s and 60s, things will slow down. But I didn't think on the writing and producing side that things would slow down. Right. And I thought they would increase because, oh, look, I'm wise now. I'm experienced. Right. I'm in the industry. Right. Sure, certainly someone's going to want that. Mm-hmm. And there are some people who want that, but they don't even want, I know showrunner types who've been asked to work like I was saying before, work in the background. Right. While they put the TikTok people up front and call them the creators of a show. Right. And that to me is so disrespectful. Yeah. It is so, it is shameful that they would do that and just squash the talent that they have instead of embracing it. Right. Right. And that's not particularly, I'm not specifying CBC on that. It's the one thing I'm not saying that they're specifically on that, right. Although they have done it too, right. But it should be shameful. And they're to not acknowledge the fact that that there are creators and artists in the industry here. Yeah. I had one very experienced showrunner guy who's still working, and he's in his late 60s, and he's still writing and doing stuff. And we were chatting one day, and he went, "You know what your problem is?" And I was like, "What?" "You're an artist." And for a moment there, I actually was insulted by it. I was like, "Don't you? What the fuck you calling me an artist?" I punched 9 to 5. I worked and then it was like, well, why? And I thought about that later. Like, why can't you be an artist?
Right.
Like, why? And when I listen to interviews now on podcasts from filmmakers and stuff in the US and in other countries, they all talk about themselves as artists. But if you do it here, somehow you're this elitist dreamer. And so there seems to be this disrespect for that, even the term that is connected to creativity, that pervades the industry here. Right. And I only say here because that's the one I know the best. And my luck reaching out to Germany, Luxembourg, Poland, all these other places is like, I show them a project and they go, oh, that's really interesting. We can get funding for this. And I'm like, oh, I thought I would have to show you like, the audience breakdown. It's very, very, very different vibe here.
Right. And, I'm worried. I mean, I'm worried for where it's all going here, and the writers that are, coming out of school and are, having high hopes about getting employment and making shows and content in this country, they have no idea what they're getting themselves into.
Well, yeah. And that's when people ask me, like, what would you teach? What sort of lessons would you go? And I would say to the people, and I said this earlier, like, you can teach about the creativity part, but really, especially in Canada, like, learn how the business is run, because as a writer here, you're not just an artist, you are a businessman, and you have to figure out a business person, and you have to figure out how to sell, how to fill out the obnoxious application forms.
4-inch binder worth of paperwork.
Yeah. And it's so much paperwork. We were just talking about this earlier, like with the CMF, telefilm, all of the paperwork you have to do to get funding to do and try and make that creative project. It becomes, it's so exhausting. And then you go, oh, well, I guess I should just hire an administrator. And you realize, oh, the people who are working the most right now are just the people who know how to fill out the paperwork.
Right.
And that's, I mean, I want them to work, but that shouldn't be all of the work.
Yeah.
And it's very, very frustrating.
Yeah.
Marvin, it's a producer Toronto Mike here. Avi said I could unmute my microphone. Thank you, Avi.
Yeah.
But I'm listening to this. It's both enlightening and infuriating. And I'm thinking, if my kids were solid writers who wanted to work in, film or television in this country, I would tell them to get the fuck out of Canada. Like, listening to this, it sounds like there is no future for, Less Than Kind, by the way, I don't know if Avi said this, was a fantastic show.
Thank you.
Good potatoes?
All right, give me some of your mom's potatoes.
Your father would like more.
There we go.
You did that on purpose.
No, I didn't.
Oh, yes, you did.
I did not.
Find it.
Hey!
You bitch!
Honey, you're tearing me apart!
Hey, guys! Hey, I'm on a date here.
Oh.
Oh.
I'm fat. I'm really, really fat.
You're so fat. So fat!
Did you just fat bash me? I'm 15.
You're blessed. That's a beautiful penis.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on.
I'm a virgin.
Beep boop, beep boop. I have a crazy family.
Aren't you gonna cradle my balls and ask me to cough? I haven't been able to leave my room.
I did not start that fire.
Oh, I know, honey, and no one could prove otherwise in civil or criminal court.
Sam! It's okay. Your daddy's just impotent.
I'm gonna need some therapy.
I'm wondering, because it wasn't touched on in your conversation here, like, why did it have to end after 4 seasons?
Well, that actually, there were 2 reasons. One, the network was hesitating in going to number 5. And that was, and on the creative side, it was about a kid coming of age in high school. And so even every season was another year in high school. So by the 4th season, he was graduating high school. So it was like, well, do we go to university now with him?
Saved by the Bell, the college years.
Yes. Well, and we were all at a point where it's like, well, you know, this cast member has passed away and we have to deal with all that. We were fine with wrapping it up. But I will say this, that actually there has been some interest in possibly rebooting the series. There have been some discussions about, and it is sort of timeline wise, we're thinking about, what would happen 15 years later to these characters? Like what is it? And you know, it's like I have my love-hate relationship with Winnipeg, and so that's where I'm from. Right. And so like what would bring them all back together again into the coldest city I've ever lived in?
Well, shout out to the Weaker Thans.
Yes, who were that was the other thing. I will say this. And I don't know if the series that do get to air do this. We spent so much time trying to find original music from original artists in Canada to try and put on the show. If I have a YouTube thing and I created a playlist of all of the music, and I had my 16-year-old listen to it and she likes it, and I hope. Because I'm not watching a lot of Canadian shows, I hope the Canadian shows are really out there looking for new sounds and new artists and new creatives that way to bring the music in there. That was we would spend hours just sitting there and listening to tunes to put in the show.
I would say too, one of the frustrating things about making television, and you experience this firsthand, is once the show is over, where can you find it? There's no distribution possibilities, or there should be, but there isn't anybody doing that kind of thing. You encountered this with Less Than Kind, where you know you kept pushing the main production company to like what's going on with sales outside of Canada, what's going on with offering it on VOD and everything like that. Why don't you talk about that?
Well, I mean, here's I'm going to talk about it, but like I'm not a distributor,
right? And
I didn't know anything about distributing, but I will say that the people who had the distribution contract, and I believe there is negotiations right now to get it away from them. They haven't sent me a report in 10 years,
right?
So I don't know how they're still in business,
right?
Most, from my perspective, what I see distributors doing is getting money from the government agencies to go to festivals,
right,
and not do anything,
right,
and not report that they haven't done anything because that would, take too long. And you've got to have all these drinks and go to Cannes, and it's sunny. The paperwork's very distracting.
Right.
And yeah, to me, most of the distributors that I've had to deal with regarding this they're not distributors. They're just taking money. Are they thieves? I don't know.
And you and I have had this conversation because, of course, I have a distribution company called IndieCan, and I was very happy, and I'd spoken to your co-producer in Winnipeg about getting the series up online in various platforms, but the rights are so wrapped up in bureaucracy and nonsense that it's impossible to get those rights back so that it can be exploited in other abilities. And
so here's the thing. So yeah, just doing my own research, my distributor was in default. Right. On their contracts. Right. So now it's kind of like, I'm sitting here going, well, I guess I could hire a lawyer and go after them. That could cost me thousands of dollars, which I don't have just to throw around. Right. And would the rights go to me, or would they go to the other producers that are attached to the project who don't own the distribution rights right now, but they would probably inherit them? If I don't know all the legalities there.
Right.
So it becomes this thing where eventually, as a creative on the creative side, you just go, I'm just going to make a sandwich. Like, I can't deal with all of this. And that's why I say, like, if you're going to be a writer, like you better learn some of the legal stuff. You better learn how to do that paperwork, because when you need to know that, not have that knowledge, it's too late. You have to have it before going in.
Yeah.
And it's you can depend on your agent for it, but some of them don't know it.
Right.
And so, and then you have to figure out like, well, what are my options here? Now, luckily, Buffalo Gal Pictures in Winnipeg is a very good company, and I think they're trying to straighten everything out right now. And I sometimes feel guilty because I don't spend as much time dealing with the Winnipeg stuff that I should, because I have strong connections there. Instead, I went to like Luxembourg and Germany. Right. But I'm hoping right now that the Less Than Kind stuff will get straightened out. But what you're saying about distributors and everything here, they're just the people who know how to fill out the paperwork.
Right.
I don't know if they actually know how to sell shows, except for you. I mean, you're completely different.
I appreciate that. But I mean, your show is no different than many other shows that have been made in this country, especially some of the older stuff like King of Kensington and some of these other things that have no exploitation anymore. No. The Beachcombers, whatever. I can name hundreds of great shows made in this country when great shows were being made. That you can't find anywhere unless somebody somewhere has taken it upon themselves to throw it up on YouTube illegally to allow people to watch it.
Right. Less Than Kind can be seen illegally on YouTube.
Right.
And I don't know if it's legal because right now the distributor has it on their YouTube website, but I haven't seen any money from that. Right. So I don't know if people are watching it or not.
The system's broken.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. And also because of the streaming, something like YouTube and things like that, the system got expanded and no one knows what the fuck anything is anymore. Like nobody knows how things work, or if they do, they're just keeping it secret. It's funny. The Writers Guild just this year, I got a check for, I guess you'd call them royalties for the writing on Less Than Kind from Spanish sales mostly that happened almost 10 years ago. And I'm like, what? So where has this money been sitting for 10 years? Shouldn't there be interest on this? Like but I was just surprised. I got the check and I didn't initially look at what the breakdown of where the funds came from. Right. And I was like, oh, I thought it was for like one of these other two shows that I'd been on since then that are seen a little bit more. And then I was like, oh, it's from sales that happened in Spain and Europe in 2014 or 2017. And I was like, that's like 10 years ago. Why am I just getting this check now?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I think it's almost time to wrap it up.
Well, I need to know if there's any hope to fix this. Like, we have a broken system. I've been, listening for the last, 45 minutes. It's infuriating.
Yeah. I think for me, I think the system needs to break further. And I think, it's horrible to say that. I think that things need to explode so that we can all clean up the pieces and remake it the way it's supposed to be made. Or somebody really, really talented and who wants to make television gets in charge of those systems. And when we're talking about the system CBC and all of the funding bodies, that it becomes more of a creative based system instead of just relying on people who know how to fill out the forms properly.
But also, you and I spoke about this on the way here, is the people that are making the decisions at the broadcasters about which shows get made and which shows don't get made have never made a show in their life.
And that to me is more about the merit system as well. Like, get people in there who know about what the creative is and know how to define that, and bring in the young people too. But as they have to apprentice, you have to learn it. It is a skill. You have to develop that ear the same way you have to practice music and the same way you have to write to become a better writer. You have to be with people who know how to make shows so that you can make better shows.
But as you said earlier, Marvin, the broadcasters in this country are so risk adverse. Like, they're so risk averse that it's all in the mushy middle.
Yeah, but part of that too is they're working with the same production companies over and over and over and over again. Alana Frank, I'm gonna name names. All right. New Metric, like these companies, it's like the door is wide open to these broadcasters for them to pitch them anything at any time, and those same production companies are the ones that are producing these shows. Very rarely is there a new producer or production company that gets a green light on a new series. It's rare, and it falls back into the same thing about risk taking. Like, that's all great that it's the same old, but is there shows any good? Are they going to attract the audience for their particular broadcast, for that particular broadcaster? These questions never get answered at that level, and it's shameful.
But for me, all of that has to start at the top. Like, there has to be somebody who says, we're in a creative business. Let's make stuff that's really interesting, and let's make stuff that might piss people off, that might get people writing in. I would think if I was the head of a network that really that claimed to care about the creative, that having someone write in about what they didn't like about a show or what they thought was offensive about a show,
right,
you could start a conversation.
Right.
Let's have that conversation.
Right.
Let's talk about what it is. Let's make that debate. Let's make stuff that's edgy, and and you've got the Murdoch and all the other stuff in there. Like, let's make stuff that's more interesting and not just about appealing to how many TikTok viewers this guy has.
Right.
And I know there has to be a balance there. There's a business and marketing sense, and it's all got to balance out. But the balance, it's not balanced right now. It seems to all be about this math instead of the creative math. And that's, of course, as a creative, I am biased in that.
And I would say more so now than ever before, based on what's going on down south of the border, that there is an opportunity there to create some really amazing fire content.
But I would argue with you that we don't have to look just south of the border. There's a little swimming pool, and you just jump across it, and there's a whole bunch of other borders.
No, I totally agree with you.
Those borders have produced some really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
And so part of me just hates the obsession that everything's about south. And right now, politically and everything, looking south of the border is a bit weird.
Yeah.
But like, there are other places to look.
Oh, for sure.
And it's just that we're not familiar with them.
Well, we are, but most producers in this country, when it comes to television, are not interested in doing co-production with the UK or Ireland or Luxembourg or Germany or whatever, when Canada has more treaties than any other country in the world when it comes to production. Yet we don't co-produce series with any of these countries, especially the UK, which is shocking.
Well, I don't know the stats. I know there's a couple out there that
very few.
But I can say, like, more of the interesting movies and more of the interesting series that I've watched in the last few years have all come not from south of the border,
right,
but from the east.
Yeah,
from going across the water and just looking there. And I have to read some subtitles sometimes. But you know what? I learned how to read pretty young, so I can do it.
Right.
I learned how to read in a couple of languages.
Right. Well, look, I mean, I think we could sit here all day and talk about all the shtick that and things that we feel about what's going on in Canadian television, and we're never going to get an answer to any of it. But I truly appreciate you being on this podcast.
I am honored.
And you're like mishpucha to me. And
There's been no refreshments or snacks, though. I will say, you could.
I know.
There is a little early.
There is
Do I plug
product placement? Product placement. Yeah, I would.
You owe this guy some money. Yeah.
Pick it up. It's definitely worth your while. This is amazing, thirst quenching.
Great
liquid.
Lakes beer.
Great Lakes beer. That's correct.
Oh, there's a logo there too.
A sponsor of T.O. Mike. But seriously though, thank you, Marvin, for joining us today, for shedding some light on, the television industry in our country and beyond. And I hope that maybe we can have you back to continue the conversation at a later date. And I wish you great success in some of the projects that I know that you're developing, one of which with me. And let's go for it.
Yeah.
Thanks again. And for all of you out there, thank you for paying attention to Unleashed. And we hope that we'll see you next time. Have a great day.
Ciao.
Every time they look at us, we'll blow.